Do you have a favorite geometric shape? A hexagon, a circle? Or perhaps you haven't thought much about shapes, but you know that you're partial to design elements from a particular era, place, or building. Hi, my name is Mariana Stell. I'm a reference librarian in the Rare Book and Special Collections Division at the Library of Congress. I want to introduce you to the first architectural handbook written by an American author. Chances are, whether or not the architectural motifs in this book appeal to you, you will find them familiar. Even now, centuries later, echoes of these designs still reverberate in the spaces that we inhabit today, as its author had a fondness for classical design elements. This modest little handbook is the first original architecture book to be published in the United States. Reprints of architectural books from English and European authors had been reprinted in the United States earlier, but this is the first homegrown work. Printed in 1797, this copy is the first edition of The Country Builder's Assistant by the American architect and author Asher Benjamin. Despite being influential in his own time, Asher Benjamin is not a household name today. So who is Asher Benjamin is a fair question. Let's talk a little bit about the author. Likely born around 1773 in Hartland, Connecticut, Asher Benjamin was a craftsman and a tradesman who became a prolific writer of technical manuals. In addition to this 1797 The Country Builder's Assistant that you see here, he wrote 6 succeeding publications, each of which addressed architectural topics in a fundamental and practical manner. By the time he died in 1845 in Springfield, Massachusetts, Asher Benjamin had published 7 books in a total of 47 editions, and he was a founding member of the American Institution of Architecture, which was the first American organization for professional architects. In short, Asher Benjamin was a man devoted to making the principles of architecture accessible to American craftsmen through printed books. There's little mystery about the intended audience for Asher Benjamin's first book. The Country Builder's Assistant is a small, homely volume. It's certainly written for builders rather than for elite book collectors. Very portable in size, this book could be carried to a job site. In fact, the title page specifies that the book is intended to be particularly useful to country workmen in general. It's important for us now, in the 21st century, to remember that Asher Benjamin, like his contemporaries, did not formally study architecture in school. In the United States, in the late 18th century, studying architecture as an isolated university discipline was not possible. Formal instruction in architecture began first at MIT in the mid-19th century. Born too early for that opportunity, Asher Benjamin would have received his training through apprenticeships. The more rural areas of the United States, however, did not always have someone with a reputation or experience or skill to take on an apprentice. And according to his own writing, it was for these master carpenters who lacked an instructor that Asher Benjamin wrote his books. This makes The Country Builder's Assistant the first DIY or do-it-yourself book. It's a handbook for ambitious carpenters written in an environment of hands-on learning during this early period of building family homes and community meeting houses that occurred in the generation after the United States had become a new and independent nation. The buildings constructed during this period therefore became associated with the beginnings of the United States as a country. As a consequence, the style for which Benjamin is probably best known, particularly in this early phase of his authorship, is now called the Federal style. Several of Benjamin's Federal-style buildings still exist, such as the Leavitt Hovey House in Greenfield, Massachusetts, that was built the same year that this copy of The Country Builder's Assistant was published, 1797. Asher Benjamin's influence on early American architecture was considerable, and today he is certainly recognized as someone who proliferated an appreciation for classical architectural motifs. The Country Builder's Assistant of 1797 was the first of Benjamin's 7 architectural books, which he wrote in part out of a dissatisfaction with the expensive and impractically large formats of English architectural books of the time. Most of us would be very sympathetic to this frustration now. Even if you could afford it, you would not want to take something like this very impressive tome out to your building site, would you? In response, Benjamin wrote these pithy, practical handbooks for builders that captured the essence of his interest in neoclassical forms. Like several of Benjamin's later handbooks, The Country Builder's Assistant took a pragmatic approach to introducing rural master carpenters and housewrights to features of the famous classical orders: Tuscan, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. The popularity of Benjamin's work was likely due to his first-hand knowledge of the distinctive needs of American builders who, while wanting to produce engaging designs for patrons, also needed models that suited their particular landscape and situation. As Benjamin himself explained in the preface to his second book, the style of building in this country differs considerably from that of Great Britain and other countries in Europe. The American mechanic is therefore in purchasing European publications under the necessity of paying 2/3 the value of his purchase for what is of no real use to him. Benjamin understood the geographic limitations of his audience, and his handbooks were enormously popular, as were the designs that they contained. Asher Benjamin authored the first architectural manual because he saw a need for education, growth, and development in his professional field, particularly in the rural areas of the still nascent United States. In the preface to his final book, Asher Benjamin explained his reasoning. "I consider it a necessity," he wrote, "that all practical house carpenters should be fully acquainted with the orders of architecture, particularly those who reside in the country where they have no real opportunity of consulting an architect." Benjamin's handbooks about the classical architectural orders were intended to be accessible enough for a carpenter of any background to use in perfecting their craft without the aid of an instructor. Admittedly less grand in its physical presentation than the British and European contemporaries, the modest appearance of Benjamin Asher's The Country Builder's Assistant belies the sophisticated ambitions of its author, and it demonstrates the importance of printing as a media for both knowledge sharing and for literally building the colonial United States of America.